Hello, and thanks for tuning in into this webcast about eduroam Managed IdP for participating organizations. My name is Stefan Winter. I work as an R&D engineer at the Catalina Foundation in Luxembourg, which is one of the eduroam national roaming operators, and I am the lead R&D engineer for eduroam in Europe. So let me now share my screen so you can actually see what this is all about. Here we go. So this is a webcast for participating organizations. There is also a different one for national roaming operators, which will be broadcast separately. So let's get started first with the very basics, so to speak, which is what is eduroam? So when you're listening to this, you probably already have a basic idea about eduroam. But anyway, let's first take a look at what the grand picture behind eduroam Managed IdP is. First of all, eduroam is a Wi-Fi roaming consortium exclusively for users in education and research. So if you're a student, if you're a staff member of a research organization, you will be able to go to Wi-Fi hotspots from the eduroam consortium, and you open your laptop and you can immediately use those wherever you are. And you don't have to have a local username and password or any other local arrangements. It will just work automatically. We are in this roaming business, so to speak, since more than 10 years in terms of being on the service level. There was a pilot long before that, so we are looking at approximately 15 years of experience in actually providing Wi-Fi roaming worldwide. Now, all modesty aside, I think I can safely say that eduroam has become massively popular. Many people around the world know it, and it's also extremely successful. So just to give you a few numbers, what we're talking about, we have thousands of organizations worldwide which enable their own user base so that they can use eduroam on eduroam hotspots. Thousands of organizations means these are actually millions of users. And these users can use tens of thousands of eduroam hotspots in more than 100 countries. We've recently celebrated the 100th, and now we have 101. So pretty much wherever you go as an educational person or research person, you will very likely find an eduroam hotspot at an organization that is somehow dealing with education or research near you. You can also find it at lots of airports, public transportation, with many roaming relationships with, let's say, non-educational core hotspots. We have, as I said, many millions of end users, and these end users authenticate whenever they travel, and for most organizations also at home, at the home campus, and they trigger billions of authentications every year. Now, when I say we have many million end users, we actually don't quite know how many end users we have. And you may find that a bit strange, but the reason for that is that we are very decentrally organized. So there is an annual operations team, of which I'm a member, but the actual operations in each country is delegated to something we call the National Roaming Operators, or NROs, and this acronym will come back later. And these oversee the participating organizations in their own service region. So they have all this under control. And for example, we don't ask how many users do you have. And we also, since we don't have any billing and it's a room consortium providing its service for free, we also don't have any accounting records, don't write invoices. So it's just not important for us to know exactly how many users we have. So we're not asking these questions. Now, with this decentralized organization comes the question, what is happening on the ground, on the campuses? So the NRO basically takes a look at the organizations that want to participate, and we have two broad groups in which these are. There are organizations which provide the Wi-Fi service on their own hotspot infrastructure. This is what we call eduroam service providers, or SPs. So this is whenever you see a Wi-Fi hotspot doing eduroam, you are connected at an eduroam SP or one of our roaming partners. The second group of organizations we have is those who manage their own end users and authorize hotspot access for those. This is what we call eduroam identity providers, or IdPs. Now, this was a lot of information, so this little arrow here tells you you are here, if you're reading or if you're watching this webcast here, this is what we will be talking about in the remainder of this session. So if you want to manage your own end users and give your users hotspot access, maybe eduroam Managed IdP is something for you. So let's now take a deeper look at what about Managed IdP and eduroam IdPs as at large, and who is this for? Can you maybe just close your browser and say, oh, this is not for me, or do you want to continue listening? So this is the important slide if you ask yourself this particular question. So first of all, we are fairly large already, as I told you. So we have a default model of how to become an eduroam IdP. This default model is somewhat involved on the technical level. You have to have lots of experience in various areas. First of all, you have to have the user base which you manage in an electronic repository. So you could have, let's say, a MySQL database with usernames and passwords. Many people these days have an Active Directory, which actually stores the user permissions and credentials. On top of that, you need something called a Radius server, which needs to be connected both with this electronic identity repository so that it can verify usernames and passwords or something else. And it has to be connected to the eduroam roaming hierarchy so that you can actually use it for eduroam purposes. Radius is a fairly old, but trusted and reliable protocol. But you have to know these protocols. You have to know how to connect a Radius server to your identity backend. You have to learn about many protocol specificities, and you have to know these by heart so that you're actually good at eduroam IdP and your users can successfully roam. It also means you have lots of infrastructure on site. So you have to provide regular maintenance, you have to do updates to the system, keep up with the latest security updates, and so on. So for a very long while, we said, yep, that is pretty much the entry ticket. This is all for free, but what you have to bring is your own knowledge and experience, and you have to set up this service on your own. If you can't afford to do that for whatever reason, then maybe eduroam is not for you. Now, as time has passed by, we've been revisiting this attitude, and we just contemplate that it's not always such an ideal world. So if you're a smaller organization, and let's not argue about what small is. If you have tens of users, you're certainly small. If you have 100, you're maybe not so small. But anyway, there is a kind of a tipping point, and if you become too small, the costs of implementing eduroam and maintaining the authentication systems can be excessive, and maybe you just don't have the resources in your IT teams to actually do that. So with what I said earlier, this would have meant too bad for you. There is no eduroam for you. But yeah, this is not a satisfactory answer. There's also a second group. Maybe you are a bigger organization and you have your wonderful enterprise ID system and all your students and all your staff are registered. It's 10,000. But hey, there is occasionally this, this visitor or short-time contractor. So the person may need Wi-Fi, but you don't want to add him to your actual identity repository. Let's say there is an auditor. He needs 2 weeks of campus access to audit you, and then he goes away. It's not really one of your users, but hey, you want to give him Wi-Fi. So for those, setting up an own Radius server just for this secondary purpose is maybe also not what you want to do. And with these two target groups, basically, I think we can say that our new system, eduroam Managed IdP, offers these organizations a quick, safe, and cost-effective way to offer eduroam for their users. Now, with all that said, here is a very short overview about what the system is. So we have basically taken all these technical bits and pieces into the cloud. So we run servers which do all the technical operations of an eduroam IdP. We have one of those dreaded Radius servers. We have an identity management backend, which happens to be an SQL database, and we operate it. So we keep this system secure. People from the eduroam operations team manage it on a day-to-day basis. We have made sure that this system is highly available, so it's on 2 separate data centers. The data centers are professionally managed, so you can trust this system to be up and online. But the most outstanding feature of all of this is the bottom line, which says that you as an institution don't have to know anything about how this is actually done and where it is hosted. All you see is a web browser window. You log into that to an admin area. You configure your users. You sign them up. You see what they're doing, and you deprovision the users as you see fit. And none of this needs any particular expertise beyond being able to navigate on that website. Now, with all that said, this sounds too good to be true, maybe. And yeah, there is one thing we can't do for you. So we have a demarcation line, and we have really made sure that we take all the technical complexities off of you. So we run, for all intents and purposes, the IdP on the ground. But we can't do and can't help you with any administrative aspects. So as I just said, so you can use the system to create and change users, you can provision them, you can revoke access, you can let the users expire when they walk away, you can access status information about the users, you can identify a user in case of abuse, which is one of also the properties of eduroam, that our hotspot access is not anonymous, so you can always trace back an individual user if something went wrong, if you did something that shouldn't be done. But what we can't do is beyond the technology. So you are still the one who has to make the decision making on who of your users is eligible for eduroam. So is it for all of your staff? Is it just for one particular research group? And so on. These are questions only you can answer. And the second thing is that you have to accept the liability for the end users. So when you create an account, when that account goes to the field, goes to a hotspot, and misbehaves in some way or another, you will have to be the one to actually sanction that user, maybe by taking away the access, for very grave things, maybe by talking to the police or whatever. So the liability still is with you. We can't take that away from you. Now, if you can live with that, I hope you are now in a position to say, hey, this is something I would actually like to try out and use. So in the next section of this webcast, we will take a look at how to actually sign up for this system. So the next thing to come is the registration procedure. It's actually fairly short and it's just a one-off. So you have to sign up, you have to provide us some information about your organization, and in the end, you have to accept the terms of use of the system, and then you're done. So let's take a look here. First of all, signing up. This system is invitation only. This is for the very simple reason that, as I said, eduroam is only for users in education and research. So you can't do this in self-service. There has to be somebody in your country who recognizes that you are actually somebody who is involved with education and research, and that organization will give you your access. This organization, if you recap from an earlier slide, is what we call the eduroam National Roaming Operator, or NRO. So you have to talk to them, have to make yourself known as being one of the small research organizations. Maybe they don't even know about you because you're too small. So you should actively approach them. And yeah, how to find out who is your national roaming operator? Well, typically we have eduroam web pages on a website called www.eduroam. And then the top level domain of your country. So if you go to eduroam.lu, you would actually go to the website we as Catalina manage, and there are plenty others. In the certain case that there is no such website, you can always ask a search engine you trust about eduroam and then the name of the country, and you will certainly find the operator in your country. Now, once you've negotiated and they find you're actually eligible for being an eduroam IdP, you can request being an eduroam Managed IdP, and this all results in a simple email, which allows you to sign up to the system. So here is that particular email. There is a URL inside with a fairly long token ID. It's actually much longer than this screenshot shows. And once you've received that, you just click on that link, and then you have to turn in the invitation and activate your account. When this mail is sent, it's valid for 24 hours. If you've missed it because you were out of office, don't despair. So you can always request a new one from the same NRO, and they will send you another one. Now, when you click on this invitation mail, you are asked to log in. Well, you don't have an eduroam account yet, so you can't log in with an eduroam credential. So this is actually something else. We do have a system for web resource access as well, which is just as federated as eduroam is. It is called edugain. Again, many thousands of institutions in Europe and the world are connected to edugain. So there is a very long list of thousands of universities and so on. Chances are that you're not in that list, because if you are connected to edugain, probably you also are big enough to also be connected to eduroam. So if you don't find yourself on that list, don't despair. So there are multiple tabs. The edugain tab is the default open tab, but just besides it, you find a tab called social networks. And once you use that, you can you find entries such as login with Google, login with LinkedIn, and so on. So you can always authenticate to the system using one of those social IDs. Now, regardless of who you authenticated with, the token in the URL identifies you as the new institution admin for this new institution. So once you have completed the login, you get into the system, and we are asking you about some information about your organization. So it's a wizard. You have a button with add new option, and then you can add new options. There's actually not a lot you can even fill out, and we actually need even less than that. So typically, you would have an organization name. Maybe you also have a logo, which we then display on the download area later on. Maybe you have an additional SSID besides the main eduroam one on your local campus, and you want the system to work with that too. We also have help desk details, and these are the only ones which are really important, because we want your end users to contact you as a first person of contact. So we can't take every question from an end user, especially when it comes to my account has expired, why have you revoked my account? All of these questions are something only you can answer. So we require you to provide a help desk email address, and this one will be displayed on the status pages for the end user. Now, if you do not configure the help desk email, this is a common caveat, the system will actually not allow you to go further in the system. So you can click your way through, but the central button about creating an eduroam managed IdP enrollment will not be shown. So please take care to fill out at least the help desk email in this section here. So once you've done that, you come to a validation on the next page, which verifies that your email address is actually an email address and so on. And then you have a button which says continue to manage IdP properties. And well, you should click exactly on that. And then we carry on to the last step in the sign up actually, and that is the acceptance of our terms of use. It's the last preliminary we have. So the terms and conditions are displayed to you on the system. It is by and large the same that we've just talked about. So it's about us doing the technical bits, you doing the administrative stuff. You promise to take care of your users and to sanction them if they do something wrong. The one thing that's also happening is, since we do live in the GDPR times, we established the two roles which are important here, which says that your organization administrator is the data controller, so all the data is owned by you, and the eduroam managed IdP system is a data processor. So we take the data of yours, we process it, but it's not genuinely our data. So your legal departments might want to see this distinction between data controller and data processor. Now, once you've read the text, there is a small button, I have read and agree, which you've seen on many websites, except that ours doesn't have 10 pages of fine print. It's really just one screen page. And once you acknowledge this and continue, you're finally set up and you can start creating your first users, which is happening or which is described in the next section of this webcast. So you are now fully signed up. Let's see what you can do in the system. So you can add users, you can create and send out the invitation vouchers for the actual sign up for the users. You can track whether or not your users have actually turned them in and activate their account. You can check the service usage and so on. So first of all, adding users. Since we are looking at small organizations as our target group, we have, well, small ways of adding new users. So there are basically two tabs at the bottom of the user management page. The default tab is Add New User, which allows you to add a new user one by one. So you enter some kind of user identifier, you enter an expiry date for how long should the user account be valid, and then you have a button to add the new user. If you have a few more users, you can also do a bulk upload, which is, as I hear it's common to use a CSV file for that, so that's why we implemented that. So that's comma-separated values. It's a file, and each line contains the user identifier, a comma, the expiration date, and then you can also specify the number of voucher tokens, which we'll talk about in a bit. Now, important for us also in terms of privacy is that the identifiers you provide for the users absolutely need not be human readable or identifiable for our system. So we really don't want to know that the user you're provisioning is called John Doe. So if you provide us with a user identifier, user123, or a synonym like Luke Skywalker, that's totally fine. And that's not an abuse of the system. It is actually the first line of privacy defense. So it's the first line of pseudonymization for the user account. So you know who that human person is. You have to know, because you have to be able to sanction that person if they do something wrong. But you don't have to tell us. So any kind of synonym is okay for us. And we absolutely encourage you to use such synonyms. And we don't want to see the real names. Then again, nothing stops you from providing the real names if you really want to. But this is not how the system was envisaged. Now, as you see in this slide here, I created a user which is called webinar user 123 with an expiry date end of this year. So this user in itself doesn't exist in eduroam yet. You first have to create invitation vouchers and send out these vouchers to the user out there. So what we have as a voucher is simply a URL, which gets generated for you at the moment when you need it. The important thing about all eduroam accounts, and so this is also valid for Managed IdP, is that eduroam accounts are for personal use. You can use an eduroam account on multiple devices, and the system here allows that too. But you're not authorized to send any of these invitations to mailing lists or role-based accounts of any kind, so that you wouldn't actually be able to identify who the user is. Once you create such an invitation, it is limited in its validity. So first of all, the sign-up vouchers for end users expire after 1 week. So for a week, they can enable all the devices they want, so their smartphone, laptop, tablet, and whatever they have. And that's all good. After a week, the registration window closes. They're also limited in the activation count, so you can control how many devices the person is actually allowed to sign up to the system. So the orange arrow to the right shows you the activation field. So you can create one voucher, and it's good for, in this case here, 5 devices. That's no problem, and that's actually fairly common because people have multiple devices, and there's not usually a reason to limit them to one single device. So you would just type in the number of activations you want, and you click the button New Invitation. Once you've done that, you get a new screen, which tells you that, hey, the invitation token is now ready for sending, and you can send out your voucher. Now, the only important thing about the voucher is that it is a URL. However you get that to your end user is entirely up to you, so we don't have any restrictions in place there. We do help you with some of the more common communication channels, though. So you can simply send this voucher in an email. So you fill in the email address of the destination, and then you have 2 buttons. Either you send the invitation, which is by local mail client, so a compose window comes up. You can edit the text. The text is pre-filled, but you can change it to your liking, and then you send it yourself, or you let us send it. So if you just use the button Send with Cat, which is the configuration assistant tool, which is what is behind the eduroam Managed IdP system, we send out this URL in an email to the end user. You have a default invitation text. It's localized in many languages, and whatever language you have for the admin area will also be the language in which we send the email to the end user. There's also a more or less common way to send invitations to smartphones, so you can send them by an SMS. If you do have the phone number of your user, you just put in the phone number in the box and you send an SMS, and that's it. So the cost of typically 1 to 5 cents that it actually costs to send an SMS these days is on us. You're welcome to use that service. We don't charge you this 1 cent. Finally, you may have the user sitting in front of you and they want to sign up for their smartphone, but they don't want to type a very, very long URL. So what you can also do is to display a QR code immediately in your browser window. And the typical use case for that is you have a help desk and you turn the screen around and let the QR code be scanned by the user. Finally, the last option we have provided is we would simply copy the URL to your clipboard, and then you do whatever you want with it. So you send it, I don't know, via Java or Signal on the desktop or whatever you want to use. It's really not important. The only thing important is that the URL somehow gets to the end user. Now, what happens after the user has signed up? Actually, we will look at how the sign up actually works for an end user in the next section. Well, you always have control and you see what's happening with the end user. So whenever he consumes one of these vouchers, they do so in the sense that on every device they want to use, they go to this URL, and then they can sign up the device. So the voucher leads to unique eduroam credentials per user per device. And we also have a record of all the credentials which were created with this system. So when you hit refresh on the management overview page, you see that the invitation has been turned into an actual credential, and there is an example on your right. So you see that there was a credential which was issued on the 21st of October this year. It was done on an Android 9 smartphone. And then there are some details about the credentials which you don't need very often, which is about how you can identify the credential in case of abuse. What you see here is also a field called CN, the common name. You will see that there is no webinar user 123 in the username, which is in the credential. And that is our second line of defense for privacy. So a eduroam hotspot where your user logs in will never even see the username you have chosen in the admin area. There is another level of pseudonymization. And as you can see, this is just a fairly random string. So the user cannot even be identified with the username you have in the system, let alone as a real end user with this real name, just because we provide these two layers of indirection for privacy. On the other hand, as the admin, you see which of these credentials have been issued, what the name is, you know which name in the system they belong to, and you also know which real person is behind that pseudonym in our system. So you can connect all the dots, we can't, and we're happy that it's like that because we don't want to be in that position to identify individual end users. Now, what you also see in the screenshot to the right is there is a red revoke button. So if you are not happy with this user having eduroam access anymore, you can hit the revoke button on an individual credential. So this would just invalidate the Android 9 deployment for this particular user. There is also a revoke button besides the username as such. If you hit that one, all of the credentials will be revoked and the user doesn't have access on any device anymore. Now, lastly, a fairly recent addition to our system is that we also provide you with real-time insight into the latest logins of a given user. So there is a button called Show Authentication Records, which shows you when did this user log in, did the login actually work, and where is the user in the sense that there is a domain name for eduroam service providers. Not all our service providers actually supply that information. It's called an operator name. If we don't have the operator name for the eduroam SP, this field is blank, but you still see that the user was authenticated at this particular point in time. Now that's basically it. You've seen how you can create a user, how to give the eduroam access out to the user. You see what the user is doing in terms of did he actually create credentials, where did he log in and when, and you can revoke the access. So the entire life cycle of user management has been explained here. So let's now go to the last section, which is not strictly for you as an institution admin, but it is for the end users about how do they perceive the system, how does the system look for them, what can they do in the system. So in this section here, we have the end user section, which is fairly lightweight because all you can do is pick up a new credential and you can manage your own credentials in the system. So picking up a credential, like I said, the only important thing is the URL. But if you choose to send the email via the invitation system from Managed IdP, then it will look like that. So this is our default invitation email. And there is again a link inside to an account status page and with a very, very long token. It's actually much longer again than this screenshot here. And all the user has to do is click on that link. So he arrives at his account status page or her account status page. Now this page looks like that. It's this is really the entirety of the page. There's nothing more. This page is already doing something clever. So we already determine what operating system is the user using right now. And the eduroam installation program we generate is then operating system specific. So the user doesn't have to provide us actively with information, I want a Windows 10 installer. We figure that out on our own. So there is one less thing the user can do wrong. So it's all happening automatically. So effectively, all we have is one big download button, and all the user has to do is push that button. We do have an import pin. This is just for one-time use. So during the installation time on the device, the user will be asked what was the pin you were shown on the download page. Then he has to provide it. But this is only once during installation. During daily use of eduroam, there is no such thing as a password or a pin or anything. So the invitation here leads you to this page, but there's actually quite a lot of information on it. So the very first thing without the arrow is the email address. That is the help desk email we asked you to provide, so they know how to contact you in case of problems. What you see with the arrow here is the fact that you are a new user without any eduroam credentials. This is actually quite important because the URL you go to is not just for the sign up. You can always and perpetually use it to query the status of your account. So how many credentials do you have and so on. So we'll see a screenshot about that later. But when you first come to the system, you are identified as a new user who is just now starting. The user is also told how many more devices he or she can sign up. So we have, as we used in our example, 5 activations. They can add 5 more devices to the system, come to this page, come to this URL with all those devices they have. We also tell the user what we identified as the operating system. So this is all settled. And lastly, the import pin I was talking about, which is needed during the installation process. And that's it. So there's not a lot of information on the page to digest, and there is only one button to push. So we really hope it is simple enough for a typical end user to just do it and not have issues with that. Now, what is then happening afterwards depends on the operating system. So on Windows, there's an executable that has to be double-clicked and run. On macOS and iOS, there is a pop-up coming asking, do you want to install this network and so on. I'm not going into too much detail on those, but I do provide one example. So once you have run through the setup process on macOS, this is what you're going to see. So it installs something macOS calls a profile. And this profile contains all the eduroam settings you need. So what you see here is that, first of all, the profile we have is digitally signed, meaning that there is a digital verification that this profile was actually issued by somebody who is authorized to issue these profiles and not just some random person out there. You also see that there are 2 networks in this particular profile. That's because I want to deploy Managed IdP for 2 SSIDs. We always provide the eduroam one, the first one, but I chose to provide a second one, which is called eduroam school, which is a specificity here in Luxembourg. What you also see below that is something that looks a bit more strange. So there's another Wi-Fi network we always install. It's not identified by an SSID. It is identified by a passpoint roaming consortium. The reason for that is that we are just on the verge of having more roaming relationships with third parties based on a new system for Wi-Fi roaming, which is new to the industry, which is called Passpoint. So if you're interested in that, just put that in a search engine and you will learn lots about Passpoint. It's a fascinating new technology, and we already add it right now to our installers because this is probably the next big thing to happen. If you're not near a Passpoint network, it just doesn't do anything. Yeah, lastly on this screenshot, you see the certificate, which is then the username that got installed into your system, which is then, as you see, this second level of pseudonymization again. Now, the last thing is that I said the URL for the end user is quite useful, not just for sign up. So even when this 1 week registration window has passed, or when all the devices have been used up, it is useful for the user to keep this URL, and the invitation mail says so, just because in the future he or she can go to that web page and they see the status of their current eduroam credentials. So the details are below here, so I put a screenshot of that. So you see when was a credential issued, when is it set to expire, what device was it issued for, and so on. Now, one interesting thing the users can actually do actively on that page is on the very lower right, you see the revoke. So if the user figures that he doesn't use that device anymore, or it was lost or stolen or something, they can in self-service deactivate the access for that device to eduroam. And that's, well, basically all you can do, except for signing up. That's not a whole lot, but after all, this system is supposed to be easy, not just for administrators, but also for end users. So the amount of things you ever have to do is fairly limited. Once you get your account, it's just going to work until the day it expires. And when it expires, you either need a new access or your life cycle is complete. Now, this is pretty much all I can tell you in terms of workflow. The last slide, for those of you who are really interested in the technology behind it and how it actually works. So if you're not into that, you can just yeah, have a coffee right now. For those who are interested, our system is based on an authentication type called TLS, which uses client certificates. So that's a means to identify a device and a user, which is pretty much the best available technology we have to manage user credentials. The reason it's the best is that there is no password anywhere in this system. So when you sign up your device and you provide this import PIN, the client certificate gets installed on your device and it stays there. There is not even a password that gets transmitted during the authentication. The certificate has a private key and it never actually leaves the system. This is, well, for those who are not involved with it, fairly close to magic. But this means that even if your user is somehow tricked to connect to a rogue access point, with this system here, there is no personal data to be lost because there is simply no password, so nobody can ask you and sniff your password. The revocation process allows us to have near real-time revocation. So as soon as you hit that revoke button, in under 2 minutes, the entire system knows about the revocation status and will in the future refuse to authenticate the user. For those really curious about that, the protocol we use for that is called the OCSP Online Certificate Status Protocol, which propagates information about certificates being revoked very effectively. And the last bullet is actually something you know because you've listened all the time very closely. The privacy in the system is assured as best as possible, meaning yes, there is a way to identify end users. That's because eduroam as a consortium wants us to be able to identify end users, or wants you to be able to identify them, so that we can actually sanction those users. But every party in the middle will not ever see an actual username. The hotspot you see sees a pseudonym, and that pseudonym is linked to another pseudonym in the Managed IdP admin area, and only you as the admin can de-anonymize that and identify who the user actually is. That is, together with the client certificate and the lack of a password, is really the best technology the industry has at this point in time to identify users, but to do so in a privacy-preserving manner. And we really hope that you're going to like that system with all its privacy-preserving properties. With all that said, all I can say at this point is thanks for listening. This is the overview for the participating organizations. As I said, if you happen to be a national roaming operator, thanks for listening, but there is a different webinar for you. We can also have interactive questions, and you will explain the part of the system which is pertinent for NROs. So thanks again, and I hope to see you in Managed IdP very soon.